So the first thing that I'd really like to cover is why am I here today talking about NHS Scotland and the circular economy? Well, the NHS, as we know, is about 10% of the UK population. I believe we are the largest employer in Scotland. I'm going to look to Scotland. Yep, we are definitely the largest. We are a national provider, which means that we are that cornerstone organisation. We provide services in every part of Scotland, which means that we have to interact with the supply chain in every part of Scotland. About 40% of the national budget for Scottish Government goes on health and social care. So there's no bigger part to deal with, if you like, than working with the NHS. And in terms of my job, it definitely keeps me awake at night when I think about trying to change the supply systems that feed that monster of an organisation. In terms of money, now I'm being told that these are the right figures because I did check with my boss this morning. The national budget for NHS Scotland is £16 billion this year, and national procurement, which is the sole body with responsibility for procuring and putting in the frameworks for the whole of Scotland, will manage about £2.6 billion worth of contracts. So that's a massive undertaking and a massive task by one body. And I see that as a massive opportunity in terms of the circular economy. The circular economy is really focusing on building environmentally sustainable, socially sustainable, resilient supply chains. Okay, and I'm going to focus on environmental and socially because they are both core to what we're trying to achieve in terms of the circular economy. Now, the final point on that slide is really something that I'm going to touch on a lot as I talk to you today. It's about changing the way that we do things. We cannot continue on the path that we have been taking. If you've got a phone in your hand and you open up the BBC News app now, you'll see that the lead news article, which was posted literally just a few minutes ago when I was sat in the audience, is that we're about to breach the 1.5 degree global warming. Okay, that is incredibly significant. So when we talk about environmental sustainability and doing things differently, it's not a matter of whether we've got the budget or how we evaluate things. It's actually about the ability for us to provide resilient and, shall we say, sustainable in provision of providing healthcare going forward. So we have no option. But what I'd really like you to come away is not going, oh gosh, this is all doom and gloom and we've exceeded or are likely to exceed the 1.5 degree target. But I'd like you to look at this as an opportunity. As I am speaking to you here today, it's about trying to change that relationship with supply chain and to get you to support us on a journey, which always makes me feel like an Olympic athlete when I say that, because we're all on a journey. But the reality is how we change our supply chains to make things more resilient. Now, we published within the Scottish Government the NHS Scotland Climate Emergency and Sustainability Strategy last year. And that's the new hospital in Orkney, which is our first net zero hospital. On the slide, it gives you the date of our net zero target of 2040. Now, for those of you that are familiar with Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, i.e. the things that we're turning on and switching on and driving around, that's our target date, 2040. If you delve into that strategy document, you'll realize there's an even more challenging target, and that's associated with the products and the services we buy. NHS Scotland aims to be net zero with all of its suppliers by 2045. And I would expect you all to take a big intake of breath at that point, because that is a momentous challenge. Now, why are we focusing on this? Now, the pie chart that's on this diagram, I've actually stolen from NHS England. Theirs is a much nicer diagram than ours, okay? But it's pretty much the same in NHS Scotland. And what that diagram is showing you, that over 60% of the carbon footprint of the NHS is associated with the products and the services we buy. And what that means in real terms is NHS Scotland can't be net zero without changing the relationship with suppliers. If NHS Scotland can't be net zero, Scotland can't be net zero. And if Scotland can't be net zero, the UK won't meet its target. So there's a massive opportunity here and a massive, I think, responsibility for us to engage with the supply chain differently to be able to meet our net zero targets. Now, the circular economy is a wonderful term, and actually there was a recent audit undertaken by the Chartered Institute of Waste Management, and in that audit they discovered that actually about 90% of sustainability professionals didn't know what circular economy meant. So if you're sat there and you're thinking, I have absolutely no idea what she's talking about, don't worry about it. Fundamentally, circular economy is a way of thinking. It's a paradigm shift. It's about trying to keep products in circulation and in use for as long as possible. But that doesn't mean that we're looking for second rate or less functioning or higher quality or less innovation in any ways. It's about working with suppliers to make sure that products are designed with longevity in mind, so that they might be modular in design. They might have parts, for example, which are replaceable. They might be procured on the basis of a lease contract or a service contract rather than an ownership contract. So there are different models that we take into account. And quite often when you talk about the circular economy, it's also useful to talk about what we tend to focus on at the moment. And I would guess that maybe 90% plus of all our procurement follows something called the linear economy. And in the linear economy, the different aspects, if you like, throughout the procurement chain are treated in isolation. So you have got the mining of the raw materials, you've got the manufacture, you've got logistics that was spoken about earlier, you've got the use of the product, and you've got the disposal of the product. And each one of those is considered in isolation. It's very, very linear. If you look at the circular economy, you start to look at multiple models in which it might involve take back, it might involve reuse, and that might be reuse internally with the NHS, for example, laundries or sterile services. It might be returned to the manufacturer. So we might buy an item as a single-use item, and the manufacturer might offer a take-back option to us and then resupply that item to us as another new single-use product. And right at the bottom there, we've got recycling. Now, this diagram here is the one that I normally use because actually I think it's probably a little bit easier. And right at the heart of that centre, you've got reuse. So that's where we're focusing. So if there's one message to you, it's come and talk to the NHS about the way that you can supply products to us which enable them to be reused. Even if that involves you taking that back for remanufacture, even if it involves you taking that back for repair. That's the ideal goal. That's really where we're focusing in terms of the circular economy. And as you move out of those circles, you'll see recycling. Now, in many ways, when we recycle products, we fail because we've already lost the energy and the value in terms of the product. However, I think when you focus on the NHS and an organisation which, due to infection control, needs to rely on a really high percentage of single-use items, recycling becomes really, really important. And what we've been doing within the Circular Economy programme is looking at the materials of the products that we buy and looking at the market in Scotland with the Resource Management Association of Scotland to try and link the two, to make sure that we're buying products which can be recycled. Now, I know cost is something that comes up quite a lot, but what we don't often talk about is material scarcity and price volatility. And as you might have experienced price volatility when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal and there were supply chain issues, exactly the same is happening in terms of elements and materials that we use. Many of our healthcare equipment relies on many, many minerals which are currently either scarce or extremely scarce. So this makes perfect sense for us to consider systems which enable these products to have a much, much longer life. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm just going to run through these because I find some of these numbers quite staggering. So if we're looking at single-use scissors, for example, and the example I've given you there is for 11 centimetre scissors. In Scotland, and Scotland alone, which is only about 10% of the UK, we currently buy and use about 1.7 million 11 centimetre single-use scissors, and other sizes are used and of course are available. So that gives you some idea of the magnitude of resources which are available. Now, many of those scissors are made to the exact standard of a reusable product, but because of the way that they're supplied and because of the systems that are in place, they can't go through our sterilisation programme, nor should they, because they're actually labelled as single use. But we need to find a way to work with that supply chain to deliver a remanufactured or a reusable product. The other area that I'll touch on very briefly is plastics, because plastics is very emotive. Plastic is a fantastic material. I'm actually a bit of a fan of plastic. And without plastic, we wouldn't have modern healthcare. We certainly wouldn't have modern, cost-effective healthcare. But we need to manage it as a valuable resource, not as a throwaway commodity. We are working at the moment, it's not finalised, on a plastics charter, which will then work with every health board in Scotland and with national procurement. And as part of that charter, we're looking to identify and create almost a material database of the products that we buy, focusing initially on plastic. As you can imagine, that process is going to take a little bit of time to do, because we are literally talking about hundreds and thousands of items. A core part of that is creating what we've described as a plastic hierarchy. What we'd really like to do is work with the supply chain and increase the good quality plastics that are out there that we know can be recycled. Not only can they be recycled, but they can be recovered into new pellet format and then can be used in Scottish industry. And what we'd really like to do is have those conversations with suppliers to say, why are you using the least preferable plastics to us? For example, PVC. PVC is a major contaminant and actually prevents us from recycling a lot of plastic. Now, there are medical reasons why we use PVC, but we want to start having those informed discussions so that we can make the most out of materials. The Charter also mirrors the UK Plastics Pact, which you may or may not be familiar with. And if you're not familiar with the Plastics Pact, you'll probably be very familiar with the plastics tax that's now in place, which is requiring a minimum of 30% recycled content. So one of the things that we're trying to do is use our supply chain to get the right type of plastics into our supply chain to be able to manage them effectively as a cornerstone organisation within Scotland, support Scottish business in that recycling, and support suppliers to buy not only recycled content, but Scottish recycled content, so that we can actually have some ownership of that. So I think I'll probably leave you with the opportunities to say it's not doom and gloom, but it is very, very important that we change the way that we do things. There's massive opportunity for you to work with us, and we would love to engage in conversations and find out your ideas, because I think it's your ideas will make the difference. And if I leave you with an analogy, which is not drowning cats, I'll suggest, okay, but as my boss said to me once, he said, I think your bit of work, he said, I think it's really, really important. It's a bit like smoking on buses. And I said, what do you mean it's a bit like smoking on buses? He said, well, when I talk to my children who are now in their early 20s, and I tell them that we used to allow smoking on buses, he said, they look at me as if I've just, come from another planet, as if, how could that ever be acceptable? And I think the circular economy is going to be a bit like that. I think in 20 years' time, we'll look back at the way that we manage products and resources, and we'll go, why did we ever think that that was acceptable? So I shall leave you there, but I would be really keen to speak to people and hear more ideas. Thank you.